And good morning, everyone. Today is Friday, November 13th, 2020. I'd like to thank you for joining us for the virtual town hall for the City of Riverside. This virtual town hall is being presented by Fair Housing Council of Riverside County in partnership with the City of Riverside and is made possible through the Fair Housing Initiative Program, Education and Outreach Federal Grant from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. My name is Nathan Szynski. I'm the Program Manager for Fair Housing Council of Riverside County. I have worked within fair housing for nearly 10 years, and before that, had 15 years experience in the mortgage lending arena. I want to begin by introducing our esteemed panel. For the City of Riverside, Councilmember Erin Edwards. Councilmember Edwards has dedicated her career to service. She got her start in front of a high school classroom, serving 2 full terms in AmeriCorps. Since that time, she has over a decade of experience in the nonprofit sector, managing portfolio of health investments for United Way, directing a network of soup kitchens, food pantries, and homeless shelters, and funding programs for youth in foster care and innovations led by women and girls around the globe. Councilmember Edwards has lived in the United States, France, Canada, and Haiti, and she has a master's degree in international development. In Riverside, Councilmember Edwards sat on the Riverside Downtown Partnership Board and was the former chair of Globally Connected, a refugee serving organization in Riverside County. She lives with her partner Liz and their young daughter Ramona in downtown Riverside. We also have Richard Lemire, testing coordinator and fair housing investigator for the Fair Housing Council. Mr. Lemire joined the Fair Housing Council in 2015. Before that, Mr. Lemire was a public information specialist for the Community Action Partnership of Riverside County, where he was responsible for all community and media relations. He is also a past executive director of the Moreno Valley and Beaumont Chambers of Commerce. From the Legal Aid Society of San Bernardino, we have Carl Wallin. Mr. Wallin is a staff attorney at the Legal Aid Society of San Bernardino. Mr. Wallin specializes in the practice of housing law in both San Bernardino and Riverside counties. Carl began as a volunteer with the Legal Aid Society and later became an attorney. He has 7 years of experience with housing. Additionally, we have Mike Nagy, SCRHA Public Affairs and Riverside Area Manager. He has almost 20 years of government and public affairs experience. Mike has been managing and coordinating the SCRHA's advocacy and public affairs activities since November of 2014. Responsibilities include performing research and disseminating and communicating information to the SCHRA membership on current events, industry trends, legislative and regulatory issues affecting the rental housing industry. Mike is a graduate of the California State University of San Marcos with a double Bachelor of Arts degrees in European History and Political Science. Mike previously was a policy analyst for the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce and served as a community liaison and performed constituent casework for former Congressman Randy Duke Cunningham and Congressman Ron Card. And we also have Liz Penny Muglia, HR and Marketing Director for Fair Housing. Ms. Penny Muglia manages the rental assistance program through the City of Riverside's CARES Act funding. Before working for Fair Housing, Ms. Penny Muglia worked in the office of Riverside Mayor Rusty Bailey as the lead analyst on housing and homeless policy, the liaison to the Human Relations Commission, and director of the Mayor's Multicultural Forum. Ms. Penny Muglia lives in Riverside and is committed to her community. She has served as a volunteer for several local organizations, including Big Brothers, Big Sisters, KRCB, Rebirth Homes, and others. I'd like to welcome all of our panelists. We're going to begin this morning with opening statements from each of our panelists. We will then move to our panel discussion, where each panelist will be presented with a question, and the other panelists may add additional information as they desire. Attendees at this time are in listen-only mode. If the attendees have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen. After the panel discussion, we will virtually open the floor for general questions and respond to the queries received in the Q&A box. If you have a question that you would like to ask live, please indicate so in the Q&A panel. You will then be taken off mute to ask your question. We will answer as many questions as we can. The virtual town hall is being recorded for future broadcast, and I'd like to, at this time, invite Richard Lemire to begin with his opening statement.
Thank you, Nathan. The Fair Housing Council of Riverside County is a nonprofit housing counseling agency whose primary mission is to prevent discrimination in housing. The Fair Housing Act was signed by President Lyndon Johnson in 1968, 1 week after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. The Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in housing based on race, color, national origin, sex, religion, disability, and familial status. These are called protected classes, and the state of California has added an additional set of protected classes that are protected by state law. Fair Housing Council of Riverside County identifies discrimination primarily through the phone calls that it receives. We receive an average of 60 to 90 calls daily at our 3 offices in Riverside County. When discrimination is alleged or uncovered, Fair Housing Council of Riverside County investigates the complaint and refers it to an enforcement agency, either the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing, or a private attorney. Fair Housing Council of Riverside County is not an enforcement agency. The bulk of calls received are for landlord-tenant issues. Our counselors advise the callers as to their rights and refer them to the appropriate resources when required. There are occasions when discrimination is identified by the trained counselors. Many times our clients do not even realize that they are being discriminated against. Through the Fair Housing Initiative Program Private Enforcement Initiative, or FHIP Grant, Fair Housing Council of Riverside County conducts housing discrimination audits and tests, which results in discrimination cases being referred to HUD, DFEH, and private attorneys. Another component of the FHIP grant is education and outreach, and these town hall meetings are being conducted under the auspices of the FHIP grant. Fair Housing Council of Riverside County is pleased to have you join us today.
Thank you, Richard. I'd like to now invite Councilmember Edwards to present her opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Councilmember Erin Edwards. As we heard from my bio, I have a background in the nonprofit sector, and now I represent Riverside's Ward 1. Homelessness is really one of the biggest issues that we are facing in the city of Riverside and frankly, the region and around the nation. When we talk about how to best address homelessness, I believe one of the ways we have to look at it is from the prevention angle, prevention of homelessness in the first place. And one important way to do that is through housing, making sure that we are building more of it, that it is affordable, and that we are helping people stay in their homes. And we do, as a city, we have very audacious housing goals and a growing need, as we're certainly seeing with all the inequities and the gaps that COVID-19 has exposed. So I'm so glad to be a part of this panel and grateful to the work of the Fair Housing Council, and I look forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Councilmember. Carl, your opening remarks, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Myself and Legal Aid, we're very happy to be here. Legal Aid since 1958 has helped represent the rights of the indigent in our communities. Today, we are happy to assist those with free legal services to qualified individuals in the areas of housing, conservatorship, guardianship, family law, and some civil matters. If you believe that you are in need of our services, please give us a call. You can call our office at 909-889-7328 and leave us a message. Or you can, of course, email us at legalaidinfo@legalaidofsb.org. Please leave us a message and we'll get a hold of you as soon as possible and deliver services. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. I'd like to now turn it over to Mike for your opening comments.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity for letting me to speak this morning, also represent the Southern California Realm Housing Association. Again, my name is Mike Nagy. I'm the Public Affairs and Riverside Area Manager for the SCHRA. We are a 501c3 membership trade organization. We represent property managers. We represent suppliers or vendor members that supply goods and services to the rental housing sector. And also we represent renting housing professionals and also independent rental owners. About 70% of our membership is comprised of independent rental owners, and they're typically members who own 15 rental units or less. One of the things that we do is we provide education. We provide also designations to members, continuing education for professionals, and also classes on a weekly basis for independent rental owners. We also provide advocacy to represent our members and also to communicate with the community at large, as well as our elected officials, and also communicate with our elected officials on issues that are a concern to the industry, as well as at the local, state, and county level, and even sometimes at the federal level, depending on what the opportunity is. We also provide business development for our members as well. We hold a variety of different activities throughout the year to help us through our political action committee. We also do other variety of activities to also for our charities as well. And I would say if you have any other information, if you have any other questions, or if you want to seek more information about our association, you can find us at socalrha.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And last but not least, Liz, your opening statements.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me today. Richard gave a really good roundup of what happens at the Fair Housing Council, and in our phone calls, especially as the pandemic started to ramp up, we noticed a lot of people were asking for rental assistance, and it wasn't something we had in the beginning. But we were able to reach out, and one of the things that we can do is kind of the feet on the ground. We can send information to our council members and to our legislators and let them know what we're hearing. And we are really grateful that they were flexible, and when funding was received, they worked with us and they said, how can we help? And they made money available for rental assistance. So a lot of those protected classes that Richard was mentioning are the ones that get hardest hit during a pandemic. So we are working hard to get that funding into the hands of people who are in danger of eviction. We want to stop that cycle before they become homeless. And again, we just want to express thank you to City Council and to all the other organizations that are out there that are cooperating with us because we're all here to serve. So.
Thank you, Liz. And to all of our panelists again, I say welcome and thank you for joining us this morning. The Fair Housing Council of Riverside County has gathered questions that has been received by their callers. And so these questions will be asked to specific panelists, and then we're going to open it up to discussion. If any panelist wishes to add any information to any question, please feel free to do so. So I'm going to begin this morning directing the first question to Councilmember Edwards. Councilmember, the first question is, what programs or resources does the city have in place or plan to put in place for those residents who are struggling to pay rent or catch up on past due rent?
Thank you for that question. So Riverside received $28 million in CARES Act funding, and then City Council had a big job to do. We had to determine how to allocate that funding. And one of the ways that we did it is we put a survey out to Riverside residents to ask them, what are the needs that you're seeing in our community arise due to COVID-19? And what we heard back, and not only in the answers where people filled in bubbles, but in the free-form comments that people gave us. We heard stories about people who didn't know how they were going to make rent. We heard from those who were concerned about the growing issue of homelessness. And so we knew as mayor and council that we really needed to allocate many of our resources in the city to preventing poverty and to addressing housing needs and homelessness. So we did, as part of our CARES Act allocation, put just over $3 million toward a rental assistance program in the city that will pay up to 3 months of rent or past due rent. And that program is actually operated through the Fair Housing Council, and the city is looking to further streamline the program so we can help even more people. And I know that Liz, who's on the panel today, can speak more directly to what that program looks like and how to access it.
Liz, if you'd like to follow up with that and just kind of go into a little bit of details before we move on as to perhaps what the qualifications are for the program, how somebody can apply for it, just provide a bit more detail to our listeners, if you would.
Absolutely. We've had a long road since we launched this in July. We found that a lot of people didn't feel the urgency in the beginning because we had a lot of moratoriums in place and people did feel protected, and some people didn't understand that they would have to pay back that rent. So through a lot of marketing and getting that messaging out there, we've seen tremendous growth. We've been partnering with a lot of food pantries and food giveaways to try to reach out to the people that are in need. So if you're looking at an individual that is trying to apply, the CARES Act recently lifted any kind of income cap. So it doesn't matter what your annual income is, you are eligible to get past due rent paid back. We can pay up to 3 months, and then on an individual basis, we can actually pay up to 6 months past due rent. None of it can be before the date of basically April 1st. And what happens is the tenant will fill out an application. They'll turn it in, and that application can be found at fairhousing.net. They'll turn in the application, we'll review the application and a couple of other pieces of information, which include a driver's license and an affidavit that says that your loss of income or your financial stress is due to COVID-19. We'll need a lease and a copy of your lease, and that's essentially it. Then we'll review the application and we try to get the funding out as quickly as possible. We are also pivoting right now because we have, like they said, $3.5 million to try to spend in a very short period of time. So we're also pivoting to trying to work more directly with property managers. So if there are property managers out there who have a lot of delinquency on their books right now, please reach out to us at 951-826-5891. If that's the wrong number, Nathan can correct me. Please do reach out to us, and we want to work together to try to do large groups of tenants all at once to streamline that process.
And Liz, could you clarify the geographic area that the assistance is being provided for?
Sure. The CARES Act funding was through the City of Riverside, so it's only people who live within City of Riverside limits. There are other programs out there. Not every city has been as generous as our city council with funding for their individual city, but there's also countywide funding through the United Way and United Lift, and they do have a little bit of funding left, but I think it does have some additional restrictions on it. So if you're in the City of Riverside, please do call Fair Housing. If you're not in the City of Riverside and you need to know who else to call, please still give us a call and we can give you that information.
Thank you, Liz. I'm going to knock this over to Richard for a moment. And I'd like to ask you, since COVID-19 began, have there been any emerging trends in terms of discrimination or disparate impact that Fair Housing Council of Riverside County has noted?
Well, thank you, Nathan. And yes, since the beginning of the COVID-19, initially there was an uptick in discrimination, particularly in race discrimination and single females of color. Definitely, we were receiving more calls. And now, however, because of the impact of the being behind on rent and fear of eviction and just not knowing what the situation is, those calls are pretty much focused on the immediate situation that people are in. And they may not be recognizing discrimination practices that may be being used against them. However, our counselors, when we do speak with the callers, we try to get a feel as to, you know, not only what your situation is and to try to make a reference to, you know, to dealing with your immediate problem, but we also like to probe to find out, you know, what is the reason for the way that your landlord is acting, and why you feel that you know that you're in this situation. Obviously, they're in the situation for many times just not having enough income, but we do find out there are other cases, and that is what fair housing is particularly charged with, is to discover discrimination, instances of discrimination. And we have found those, and we have been able to get discrimination packets to those individuals that feel that they have been the victim of discrimination, and we're able then to work through and to process that. And we certainly invite anyone that feels even that that they are a victim of discrimination to please contact Fair Housing, and we certainly would like to help you. And this is the best opportunity that you have to address those grievances.
Thank you, Richard. Carl, I'm going to move it over to you for just a moment. And specifically, as we're talking about, you know, rental assistances and moratoriums, could you speak a little bit on the AB 3088 and what kind of protections those provide to our residents, as well as when it expires?
Certainly. So AB 3088 is really wide ranging, and it's obviously going to extend beyond what I'm going to be able to tell you about right now, but I am going to hit the highlights and the things that I believe our viewers will care about the most. The hottest topic with AB 3088 is that if you fall behind in the payment of rent, you are now entitled to a 15 court day notice, which is a substantial change from the old 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. Now, during that period of time, during that 15 court day period notice, AB 3088 also allows the tenant who has fallen behind in payment of rent to give a declaration of inability to pay. That declaration would prevent the landlord from being able to sue for eviction. So the tenant would not be able to get evicted for lack of payment until at least February of 2020, assuming they were submitting these declarations timely every single month as AB 3088 provides. Now, unfortunately, you do still have to pay some of your rent to avoid eviction after February. So AB 3088 does require the payment of 25% of the rent due and owing in order to avoid eviction in February. So for instance, if the tenant were to not pay anything right now for the month of November, for the month of December, but timely submitted the declaration, they would not be able to be evicted for lack of payment until February. Now, if that same tenant were to instead pay 25% of the rent due and owing each and every month leading up to February, then they wouldn't be able to be evicted at all for the back rent, but the landlord would be able to go after them in small claims court for the balance, the 75% balance. That would not be an eviction though, and the tenant would still be able to live in the home. But as soon as February strikes, full rent will now be due and owing from then on out, unless the laws are to change. The other big hot ticket item of AB 3088 is evictions now require cause. If anyone has any familiarity with evictions in the past, let's give an example from perhaps 2019. A landlord did not require cause to evict. They could issue a 30 or 60-day notice to quit to the tenant just for any reason at all, because they don't want them there anymore. Now that is no longer the case. Cause is required in order to evict until at least February.
Okay, you mentioned court date. When you say that they have 15 court days, what does that translate to for somebody that's not familiar with that term?
Sure, beautiful question. So the easiest way to calculate those would to probably think of court days as business days. So any day that is not a holiday and it's not a Saturday or Sunday. So Monday through Friday, those count. Any holidays, they would not. And then obviously Saturdays and Sundays do not count. So very, very similar to business days. 15 court days in reality ends up being very similar to around 3 weeks notice.
Beautiful. Thank you for clarifying that. Mike, I'm going to move it over to you for a moment. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues, obviously not only are tenants facing issues, but I'm pretty sure that the property managers and property owners are also struggling. So what resources are available to individuals who have rental properties? They're the actual owners or corporations. What resources are available to them?
Well, and so we do provide on our webpage, we have for a while, we have our COVID-19 information page. And so there post links to maybe on the eviction moratoriums for a period of time, or if there was any individual programs that property managers or our independent rental owners could read about and look into. We also provide, through our legislative updates, so they can also make sure that they're getting the latest information, whether it's AB 1482 or it's AB 3088, and making sure that they're complying with the law. In terms of what available information, it depends on what, let's say their mortgages, and who is their servicer is. And so we would recommend that they, contact their servicer and see what resources are available to them. If there's anything in terms of, let's say, regarding the rental assistance programs, we don't direct our members to go look at them, but they're saying, well, maybe they can share that information with their tenants to see if their tenants would qualify for those assistance programs. Likewise, down in the city of San Diego and in the county of San Diego, there's similar programs down here to assist tenants who have been affected and then they may qualify for those programs. And really, we're just trying to, we provide information on our electronic newsletters, as well as our other, any particular updates about there may be any changes or information available. And we're also an affiliate organization of the National Apartment Association. So they too also have available best practices, fact sheets, other resources that might be available to both to our property managers and independent rental owners.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Edwards, I'm going to move it over to you again. One of the issues, of course, it's facing the City of Riverside, you mentioned it in your opening comments, is trying to limit homelessness. And one of the issues that's faced, of course, is affordable housing. And here at Fair Housing Council Riverside, we've also noticed that affordable housing turns into fair housing issues because some people are forced to put up with certain things in order to maintain their affordable housing. So one of the questions is, are there any plans moving forward for the City of Riverside to expand any affordable housing within the City of Riverside?
The short answer is yes, and let me dive into that a little bit. So in 2018, the City of Riverside did work with the community to adopt our Housing First plan, and that does identify sites in all 7 wards of the city in which to develop affordable housing. And then we'd identified 56 sites initially. We were able to narrow that down to 21 sites, 3 in each ward as part of this Housing First plan. And I'm very excited to say that the city currently has about 500 units that are in the pipeline for development. The unfortunate news is that these projects could take up to 3 to 4 years to actually develop. But we are working as hard and as quickly as we can to get as much affordable housing as possible in our city. I'll also say that we're working at a policy level to think about how to ensure that any housing that comes into our city would have some number of units that would be affordable. So the Housing and Homelessness Committee, which I chair, it's a council committee, we put the wheels in motion for what's called an inclusionary housing program, which would be tailored to our city specifically. and which would see how or if we could mandate a certain percentage of units to be designated as affordable units. So I personally am very excited about the possibility of a program like this, because it's how we'll ensure that we have even more affordable housing to come. Also, to say that we're in the process of putting together a 6th cycle housing element. And with our RENA numbers, we're looking to have 18,000 units in the city of Riverside, which are very needed. So we are in the process of identifying where those 18,000 units can be. And then just finally, the state recently passed our permanent local housing allocation, and we've already allocated those to 2 projects that we're excited about. One of which is in my ward downtown, which is called the Aspire project, and it would be working with students who are experiencing homelessness or who have been in the foster care system. So some great projects in the pipeline, and certainly more innovation needed to make more possible.
Thank you very much for that. Richard, we're going to move back a little bit into the COVID-19 and how that is affecting things. And one of the questions that we get a lot is, how long does a property owner have to make necessary repairs? I know that a lot of the property owners are putting off doing repairs, citing COVID-19 as a reason to do so. So under the statutes, how long does a landlord typically have to begin repairs on a property?
Good question. And yes, the state says that it's a 30-day period. And that is from the time that there is an actual official request made. And what we recommend to all of our callers here at Fair Housing is, when you communicate with your landlord, that you need to communicate via certified mail. And this is it's new to some of our younger residents, particularly the thought of even using mail, but you know, through texting, through phone calls, through emails, they're just not getting response. And so we do advise them to please put your request in writing for the repair that you need. And it really, in any type of communication that you want to send to your manager, put it in writing, certified mail. Go to the post office, get a receipt when the mail is delivered, and then you have a starting point for that 30 days. And hopefully the landlords will act quicker, especially on emergency situations where that time period is actually a shorter period of time. But they do have 30 days to respond, and hopefully they will work with the tenant. You go past that 30 days, and then it does get into the legal realm. And I might ask Carl what would happen if someone did not get a response after that 30 days.
Sure. So the 30-day time period comes from the implied warranty of habitability that's in any rental agreement that a tenant has with the landlord. The tenant is entitled to a home that's fit for human life, fit for human habitation. If there's some habitability issue, some severe issue that requires fixing, a tenant can notify the landlord that it needs fixing, and the landlord then has a reasonable time to fix it. Now, the 30-day time period comes from California law construing a reasonable time as typically 30 days. In some instances, it can be faster. Perhaps in some instances, it can be longer. But in general, 30 days is your timeline for the landlord to make that repair after the tenant has requested it. If the landlord were to fail to meet that obligation, and it becomes obvious that the landlord doesn't really have any interest in fixing it, it's probably wise for the tenant to then call a service like the Legal Aid Society of San Bernardino, or any attorney service that's familiar with the law here, because the tenant does have remedies, but the remedies can be very risky to utilize. There are a number of them. To name a few, the tenant can treat the lease as broken at that point, end the lease, leave the property with no owing of any additional rent. So any rent that was accrued after they left, they would not be responsible for. They would still be responsible for the rent prior to that. That is one remedy. Another very famous remedy is to withhold payment of rent. This is extremely risky, and it can lead to the unlawful detainer process, which most tenants, in my experience, it is not a place you want to be. But it is a remedy under California law. There are others, but those are perhaps the two most popular. Or perhaps another is that the tenant can use 1 month's rent to make the repairs themselves. And use the rent for that purpose. Again, all very risky remedies. Please, if you're going to utilize these, consider calling an attorney, consider calling a service like ours, Legal Aid Society of San Bernardino, before you employ these methods.
Thank you, Carl. And keeping in line with repair issues and habitability, council member, what powers does the city code enforcement department have in addressing tenant problems in terms of their rental units? What can a tenant expect if they do call code enforcement?
So the city does prefer for tenants to work with their landlords to address any issues with their rental unit. If the landlord is unwilling to resolve the issue, tenants can contact our code enforcement to make a complaint, which can be done by calling our 311 number. Code enforcement, just as a note, it does not regulate issues with rent or lease terms, and they also don't address aesthetics issues such as dirty carpet or old paints, but they would step in if it is a health and safety issue. So they would regulate substandard living conditions. So for example, plumbing leaks, heaters that don't work, insect, rodent infestations, etc. But do try their very best not to get involved with any landlord-tenant disputes. However, would step in with any condition that would affect urgent health and safety concerns.
Perfect, thank you. And Richard, can a landlord turn off somebody's power or lock them out of a unit if they feel that due to the moratoriums, they can't go through the legal processes for evictions? Is that a remedy that a landlord can actually utilize?
And that's a very short answer, and the answer is no. They cannot do that. And if a tenant is faced with that situation, their remedy is to call the police.
All righty. And Carl, it's been our experience because we have seen certain cases where, yes, the police were called for such a situation of a lockout. It was an illegal eviction, and yet still nothing was done. At that point, what would you recommend a tenant do? If they've gone ahead and called the police, what should their next step be?
It's unfortunately extremely common for the police to, in this situation, retort that it's a civil matter and that you should pursue civil recovery. Self-help eviction is a potential crime, and it can be treated as such. And the police do have additional resources beyond just throwing their hands in the air and saying it's a civil matter. Some I have seen in the past do allow the tenants to re-enter. If a tenant were to call me and tell me the fact pattern that you described, and they did so perhaps the same day or the very next night, a very recent event where the police did not allow them back on the property, I would suggest that that person call the police watch captain. They're generally a bit more familiar with the actual laws. Most police officers are not attorneys. They have not had the benefit of going to law school or passing the bar, so they may not be familiar with the relevant laws that self-help eviction is a crime and can be treated as such. That's the first remedy I would recommend, simply because it's the fastest. And in most situations, tenants want to get back in their house. That's what they want. They don't want some future recovery of $1,000 6 months later. They want back in the house now. They have kids, they have a family, they got to go to work the next day. They need to get back in their home. And the best way to do that is through the police, through the watch commander. Now, if that doesn't work, and it won't always, there is civil recovery. The specific civil code that a landlord would be in violation of is Civil Code 789.3. They would specifically be in violation of self-help eviction statute that does award damages to the tenant. And in addition to the normal damages, so whatever damages you suffered as a result of the landlord locking you out, you'd be entitled to punitive damage, damages meant to punish the landlord for having done this to you. And the specific code also allows for attorney's fees and costs to be recovered. So if you do have an attorney assist you, this is a particularly attractive case for an attorney to take because the fees could potentially come from the person being sued instead of you, the person who got evicted. So these are the steps that I would recommend. Call the watch captain first. If that doesn't get you the recovery you seek, seek civil suit, seek small claims suit for damage recovery in the future.
Thank you, Carl. Mike, I haven't forgotten about you. One of the questions that we have for you is, what do you and your organization foresee as the continuing or long-term impact caused by COVID-19? I know that, property owners are being just as impacted as renters, and we sometimes tend to forget that side of it. So what are the long-term or short-term impacts that you're seeing for property owners at this time?
Well, so there's a variety, and I guess it depends on whether, you're a large property manager that, has dozens of properties, or if you were the mom and pop that has one single property. And so we're finding out it's like all of their issues are really, it's almost unique because, maybe their business plan also may affect, what type of situation were their issues. For our larger members, we're finding that a lot of issues with, let's say, so since now, most tenants are staying in their house, or if they're not able to work, they're cooking, they're doing other things, so issues of kitchen fires, or in some cases, even just other issues related to fires. People were burning candles, or they're stuffing things in the garbage disposal. So we're also getting issues with plumbing. For the individual, let's say for the smaller landlords, obviously, if they have a tenant who's been affected and can't pay for the rent, then it's, they may have a cushion up to a period of months, but now that we're looking at 7, 8, 9 months, is how long are they going to be able to weather the storm, so to speak, if they have a tenant that they can't evict, or they can't pay rent. So again, you're also looking at issues of maintenance. There also may be the issues again, if the tenant is, if the family is always inside the home, could there be, other issues regarding plumbing, or, fires, or other, types of damage. And we're trying to track that as best as we can, but we're finding out there's like not one, there's multiple different trends that are happening depending on the size and the scale of the property and how many properties they own.
Thank you. That actually is a great segue to my next question, which would be to beginning with Richard. And that is, landlords, obviously, you have tenants who need repairs done. Landlords need to be able to access those properties. What kind of notification, one, does a landlord have to give? And can a tenant refuse entry to a landlord to make repairs because they are afraid of the COVID-19 infection?
Well, it is a 24-hour notice that needs to be given to enter a property, and so they can't do that until they've given that notice. Now, the tenant does need to allow access to make a repair for a specific reason. However, all the health guidelines need to be met by anyone that is entering the property. And on the tenant's part, they need to be able to make sure that they can protect themselves as far as keeping distance from those entering. Those that enter do need to be obviously properly masked, properly sanitized, not to touch anything that is not related with the repair, and that the tenant can keep their family members away from those that are entering, so that the work can be done. If they refuse the entry, then they would be in a violation. So it has to, it has to work both ways, but the overriding thing is to make sure that all the health protocols are adhered to and respected.
Thank you, Rick. Liz, going back for a moment to the rental assistance. Typically, or not typically, but who receives the money once that payment is approved? Does it go to the tenant? Does it go to the landlord? How does that process actually work?
The funding does go directly to the landlord. We do work one-on-one with each applicant. Up to this point, we have had the tenant as the applicant, and then we bring the landlord in after we've verified everything so that they can verify the past due amount and let us know where to deliver the check. As I mentioned, we are shifting as we went through all of the data from everybody who's applied up to this point. We do have a section where we ask, where did you hear about this program? And overwhelmingly, we heard that the property managers were, once they got one payment, they were referring lots of other tenants in that direction. So that's one of the reasons that we are shifting. We're still going to accept individual applications as we have been the whole entire time, and we have some more marketing going out to appeal to those crowds. However, we are really gearing up to be working the phones and getting out there with property managers and working with them to do 10, 15, 20 at a time. So that'll allow the property managers they know who's past due, and that will allow them to more directly get information from the tenants, very simple information, give us a ledger and get a large check for 12 to 20 of their past due tenants.
And one other question in terms of that, those individuals who receive assistance, are they required to pay that back?
No, and that's, I think, something that might be a misconception that, once this is over, you have to pay that back. However, this is a grant that came from the CARES Act through the city, and once you get that money and it's paid up, that's it. You're kind of home free. So it benefits both the property managers, even if it's somebody who has just one property, because they don't want to be behind. They don't want to be looking at any type of foreclosure situation. So once this money is given to you through our program, that's it. You are basically done with us, although we are doing a lot of follow-up with these tenants to make sure we can give them access to other types of resources. So food pantries, working with them to help them find employment, that type of thing.
Thank you, Liz. And that moves me back over to Councilmember Edwards. Is the city at all looking at or considering restricting rental increases in the future, particularly given the current COVID-19 pandemic and loss of income? Or, what are their plans, if there are any?
Thanks for that question. We actually did already bring before council, I brought it forward with Councilwoman Placencia, a moratorium on rent increases for a short period of time in this emergency. Unfortunately, it didn't pass. In fact, it failed rather spectacularly on the dais. And Councilwoman Placencia and I knew it was important to bring forward because we were seeing a trend that people were calling, saying that their rent was being increased in this particularly challenging time. Just looking back to the data, at the end of April, in just 1 week, our own Office of Homeless Solutions received 8 calls about landlords increasing rent. So just over a call a day. And then you compare that to the month of March, the whole month, there were 4 calls about rent increases, only 6 requesting rental assistance. Then in April, 16 calls with an additional 20 from people asking for rental assistance. So we were seeing this uptick in a real need, and even heard from Fair Housing Council in April that I think you had told me, Nathan, that about 15 to 20% of the calls you were receiving were actually about people who were being told that their rent was increasing. So Councilwoman Placencia and I knew that we had to try to do something about it. So we did work very closely with stakeholders to understand how rent increases were manifesting in our community. We worked with our own legal team to see how we could properly form legislation, but unfortunately it didn't pass ultimately, but is certainly something that we tried, and now we're just looking for other ways to be able to address the real needs, and hope that the rental assistance program through the CARES Act can meet some of that need.
Thank you. And Mike, next question is over to you. And it kind of still falls in line with rental increases. I know you work with your members a lot. Has there been any guidance or suggestions provided to your members as to possibly not raising rents during the COVID, working closer with the tenants to try and make sure we can at least get through this pandemic? What kind of guidance is your association providing?
Well, we try to recommend to our owners that every time to try to adjust their rent increases accordingly if they decide to do that. I mean, right now we do have AB 1482, which is in effect until for the next 10 years that regulates that rent increases can only be 5% plus the regional CPI. And so you're looking at, 2.1, 2.3%, depending on the region that you're in. And you can only do that rent increase, it can only be a maximum for 12 months. And so, and what we were experienced when this law first went into effect in January of this year is that we actually had a lot of landlords, particularly the smaller one, the independent ones, that did not raise rent for, the last 2 or 3 or even 5 years in some cases. Some cases they haven't raised their rent in over 20 years because they appreciated their tenant. And so, when they were saying, well, I need to raise rent now. And so we've always suggested is, rather than doing a number of large increases, do a lot of small increases. I mean, with some of our large property managers, for them, when they do a rent increase, they're well under 5%. In many cases, their business model, they're only doing maybe 2 to 3%. And every time when there's a renewal and the lease. So we try to tell them is if you're doing it slow and incrementally, one, you're going to face less, you're going to face less, I wouldn't say backlash, but you're going to have, the tenant's going to question it less because they're expecting that there's going to be a small increase every year. And then in some cases, we tell them if you don't need to do it, then don't do it. Work with your tenant. And as we're finding out now that we've always told with the onset of COVID-19, work with your tenant to try if you can to do a payment plan, and do something where they're at least to be able to make some partial payments. And then over the course of the long term, once then the moratorium is done, that they can then, if they can try to increase their payments so they can get back up to pace, then you avoid the idea of having the courts having to step in any of this. So,
Thank you, Mike. So that takes me over to Carl. My question, it's a continuation of this, but one of the things that we saw here at Fair Housing Council is when the rental increase caps were put in place, we started seeing, and we continue to see even during the COVID-19 pandemic, homeowners, property owners deciding to sell their properties or try and terminate leases in order to increase rents because they can't increase them the way that they used to. What is the guidance, Carl, in regards to, one, selling a property to get a tenant out? Is that legal? Are there exceptions? And also just the deciding not to renew a lease. I know you touched on it earlier, but if you could clarify that for me, I'd appreciate it.
Sure thing. So the general rule is always the new owner, when the sale occurs, steps into the shoes of the old owner. So it would essentially, for all intents and purposes, be the same landlord-tenant relationship, just with a different party. That's the general rule. Now, there are, as you'll recall, I did mention AB 3088 now requires cause to evict. AB 1482 also required cause to evict, but in less circumstances than AB 3088 now. One type of cause is called no fault just cause. One specific type of no fault just cause to evict is selling the home to someone who intends on using it as their principal residence. So if the landlord were to sell the property to someone who intends on living there as their principal residence, that could be a just cause to evict the tenant. Otherwise, the default rule does apply. The new landlord steps into the shoes of the old. Whatever the old lease agreement was, the new landlord's just as subject to that as much as the old.
Okay. Thank you. Richard, we talked about this from the beginning, but can you give me an idea of, we said that discrimination is still currently going on. It's just not being quite as reported as it once was. How can an individual identify if they are being discriminated against? What are some of the signs that they should look for?
Well, one of the main signs that we see is what we call disparate treatment. And that is, how you're being treated as opposed to other people, other tenants in an apartment complex, or other people that are renting houses from the same owners, and that is is an indication of discrimination if there is that disparate treatment. If there are more advantages given to one, as we call a class, than another, and particularly if you're a member of one of those protected classes. And that would be for federal, of course, the 7 that we spoke of earlier. And the state of California has quite a number of other protected classes in addition to what's covered in the Fair Housing Act. So basically, if you feel that you are being treated differently, please let Fair Housing know, and we can help to investigate that situation. And particularly in our discrimination packages, we ask for witness statements. And these are people that you have talked to that have seen what has happened to you, because that makes a stronger case. The more that you can show us in your discrimination package as to others that have seen these acts, alleged acts, then that makes a stronger case. And then when we receive all of that, we do review that. We will re-interview you and ultimately make that referral to one of the enforcement agencies. But just, if you've got that gut feeling, be sure and act on it. Don't be quiet about it, because that is how discrimination is able to continue, is it when it's not reported.
So can a landlord retaliate against an individual or try and evict somebody after they've reported some type of discrimination? I know that's one of the fears that a lot of our callers have. So what can happen if the landlord either retaliates or tries to evict them due to them filing a fair housing complaint?
They are protected once that complaint has been filed. They are protected against an eviction. Then they would be, that would certainly make the case even stronger. And HUD certainly looks down on any kind of activity like that. So usually, we never know when HUD is going to take a case and how long it's going to be taken. But if this is a situation, that is a major red flag. And of course, if it goes to attorney, even quicker. So no, that cannot be done. Retaliation.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Edwards, one final question for you. Apart from the rental assistance program, what other programs are in place throughout the city of Riverside, and how can the residents connect with those other programs?
It's a great question. So we do have many programs and services in the city of Riverside. We have, if you're experiencing homelessness, we have an emergency shelter program, which is through Path of Life. Our Riverside Access Center connects homeless individuals to programs and services that are really tailored as much as possible to individual needs. We recently, in fact, right before the global pandemic, and not knowing that it was coming, we opened our pallet shelter program, which is operated through CityNet. And so those are 30 individual shelters. They can hold up to 2 people, but it's a private space. And so that is an important program that we have in the city. We also have food pantry programs for seniors. There are many food programs that are through churches. I know of at least one in Ward 1 that's every Thursday distributing food. And then I would just also say, make sure that all of us are reaching out to our immediate neighbors. Often the best way to know what the needs are and to connect people to services is just asking the people who live around you, what do you need and how can I help? And that provides a benefit to all of us.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Mike, I know that you are going to need to be going shortly. So just a final question for you. What is your association actually requesting from our U.S. representatives and senators in terms of assistance or guidance for property owners? What kind of legislation are you looking at?
Well, so our National Apartment Association, our national affiliate, was taking the lead on that. And they actually had, they agreed with a lot of when the first CARES Act went out, and so in terms of the payments, but also there was also specific emergency funding for HUD, for VASH, for housing vouchers, for other block grant programs that would assist in for housing. And so our position hasn't changed too much in that. Matter of fact, I think the one that with the House version would have increased the number of housing vouchers. And so the National Association was very supportive of that. And so I would say that there wouldn't be any much change in that, because we, first and foremost, we need more housing, but also we need more money for people who've been, who don't have access to housing, to be able to get access to housing and be able to, be able to afford it. So whether it's for market rate, whether it's subsidized, affordable, we're all in favor of that. And so I would say, anything that, that increases the number of the VASH for veterans, for homeless veterans, for whether it's San Diego, Imperial, or or Riverside County, we would be pushing for that. Whether it's for other different programs, even pushing for, let's say, national rental assistance programs. So then state, county, local governments can then adopt their own programs and be able to use that. So there would not, if a tenant does encounter that they're not able to pay rent, then they can apply for an assistance program. And because, with the assistance program, at least down in San Diego County, down in the city of San Diego and the county, that money was going directly to the landlord. And so not only does it now, keep the tenant housed, but also provides comfort to the landlord themselves, saying, well, great, now this is a tremendous help to us. So we're hoping that can be the case. And then even with the federal stimulus payments, we're finding out, over 92% of our tenants were saving that money to help pay rent. And if they were negotiating with the tenant saying, I can't pay all of it, if I can at least pay a portion of it, then in many cases, those landlords were saying, absolutely, that's fine. Because if the tenant's not in that house, especially now, particularly nowadays, if a tenant vacates a unit, then it's going to be at least 2 or 3 months, if not even longer, before that landlord can find a new tenant. And then all of a sudden that's income that's no longer in the pockets of the independent owner or the property managers themselves. So, we believe that, keeping the tenant in the unit is the most important thing. And obviously, given nowadays, even with the pandemic, it's even more critical.
All right, thank you. So I have checked the Q&A panel, and I don't see that there are any questions. So as we wrap up, I am going to invite each of the panelists to present any closing statements. Today's session has been full of a lot of great information. We've covered a lot of ground. And so I'm going to ask each of the panelists to provide a closing remark. And I'm going to start first with Mike. And Mike, if you would, your closing statements.
Let's see, well, where to start? But I would say, first and foremost, I think what's the most important thing right now for our members is certainty. And what we've found out that, in many cases, they're juggling of whether, what's happening at the city level, what's happening in the county level, what's happening in the state level. And there's all these questions. And particularly with AB 1482, we asked for cleanup language because, there was a certain, for example, there was, if you're doing a increase and you're providing the CPI, well, are you supposed to provide the CPI from the previous, from the previous 6 months, or does the CPI apply for the next 6 months? And, and if you do incorrectly, then, you could be subject to, civil fines and be seen in court. So for us, the certainty is very important. The next thing I would say is also as decision makers, now that we're moving into whether, it's new administration, now we're into a new legislative cycle, is that whatever the elected officials choose in terms of how to address the problem to their municipality or statewide, is that, look at the balance between both the tenants and the landlords. And you'll probably see today, there's the press enterprise that, there's, 1.7 billion of unpaid rent. And so, just as much as the tenants cannot pay for that, but also that's 1.7 billion that's not going into the hands of landlords. And so now they have to now figure out, well, what am I going to do? I've been already, we're in a situation where now it's getting critical where we're not going to be able to maintain our property or maintain our investment. So there has to be a balance. And so whatever policy is created, it hits the broadest number of people so everyone can benefit and get the assistance they need.
Thank you.
And I would just close with that. And then again, and I'll getting ready to step out here. And so again, thank you for the opportunity of having me this morning. And I would love to continue to participate in these town halls in the future. And then if people have any questions, we have our website is socalrha.org. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your attendance. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Liz now for your closing statements, if you would, please.
I just want us all to remember the humanity of all of this. I know we have a lot of discussions about policy and the effects that can have and finances, but there are human beings and families and children and elderly folks and disabled folks behind every one of these stories. And some of us that aren't on the front lines always answering the phones do have it in our hearts. We're all here because we have it in our hearts, but sometimes we can get lost in the detail of the how and forget about the who. So I encourage each one of us to remember that we're doing good things, we're doing the right things, and we may along the way encounter people who are having a lot of difficulty in their life and maybe aren't as kind to us as we would hope they would be, but just to remember that piece of all of this. And I'm happy to work with all of the colleagues and all of the people that are out there doing the best they can to make people's lives better. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Carl, if you would, your closing remarks.
So, I mean, it's a real cliche statement, but especially when it comes to the law and especially housing law right now, knowledge is power. If you don't know what your rights are, you're not going to be in a position to assert them. So please, if you're having any sort of law issue, especially concerns with housing right now, give organizations like the Legal Aid of San Bernardino a call. We can give you a consultation if you qualify. It's free. And if you use AB 3088, 1482, the way they're intended, you can get protection right now. You can get some real value. You can maybe stay in your home. But if you don't know your rights, you can't assert them, so you won't be able to get that benefit. And that's what I'd like to say.
All right, thank you so much. And Councilmember Edwards, your closing statements, please.
I would just add to what others on the panel have shared by really highlighting the importance of advocacy and storytelling, and not to dwell on the issue of the moratorium on rent increases, but just to share as an anecdote that one of the reasons that I believe it didn't pass on our city council was I heard from some of my colleagues who, they all have a heart to help. And especially in this time, we're looking for as many ways as possible to do the best good that we can. But what I heard, what Councilwoman Placencia heard, was a real disbelief that an action like this would really have a big impact in our city, because we just weren't seeing, we were seeing an upward trend. I know I spoke to the numbers earlier, but didn't have large numbers to share. Well, the thing is, we know that for every one person who tells us their story, there are several other people who are probably experiencing the same thing and either are too afraid to share their story or don't know how to share their story in a way that it can be heard by people setting policies. So I would just say what that anecdote tells me is that really everyone needs to know, who is your city council member? What ward do you live in? And how can you work with, if you're already connected to the Fair Housing Council, that's excellent. Help them tell your story to the policymakers that they're in regular contact with, so that we know what issues are impacting people, how many lives would be positively impacted if we could make some of these positive changes. And I think you'll find in the city of Riverside that you have 7 council members who are listening and ready to do what we can.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Richard, your closing remarks, please.
All right, well, thank you, Nathan. And the Fair Housing Council does want to make a announcement regarding the affordable housing in the city of Riverside. And on October 22nd, we held a groundbreaking for what we call Mission Heritage Plaza, which is located on Mission Inn Avenue behind the Fox Theater across from the new library. And that is a project that will include 72 units of affordable housing in downtown Riverside. It'll also include the new offices for the Fair Housing Council, as well as the Civil Rights Institute of Inland Southern California, which will tell the story of civil rights in our region and be a repository for that information, very important history, and also will include meeting space for community organizations. That's worked into the plan too. So Mission Heritage Plaza, we held the groundbreaking. We're hoping to get construction started before the beginning of the year, opening in the year 2022. And we're very, very proud of our partnership with the City of Riverside, and particularly for making that happen. And we're just so looking forward to that. Also on the 24th of November, we are having a continuing the fair housing tradition of the Thanksgiving giveaway for residents that are in need. And Riverside residents may still call on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays to register for a bag including a turkey. And it's first come, first serve. So please give us a call at our office Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9 to 1, and register for that. Those are, and they'll be given away right at the site of the Mission Heritage Plaza, which is where our old offices used to be. But the one thing I do want to leave you with is to please be mindful of discrimination. And that is why we are here. That is our mission. And upholding the Fair Housing Act is of most importance. So if you feel you're a victim of discrimination, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And on behalf of the Fair Housing Council of Riverside County, to all of our panelists, I would like to say thank you for your time and for your attention and providing so much valuable information. We covered so much ground, and I know there was so much more we could cover, time permitting, but I appreciate you taking your time out. I'd like to remind everybody that this is being recorded for future broadcast, And we hope that the information that you have heard, that you've been provided, and some of the resources will help you to find some easier footing right now during the COVID-19, and particularly as we move into the holiday seasons. As always, Fair Housing Council of Riverside County is here to assist you. So please do not hesitate to give us a call. And I'd like to wish everybody a very happy weekend. This is Friday. And again, to all the panelists, thank you so much for your information and your attendance. We definitely appreciate that. Thank you so much.